One is an evolutionary biologist, the other a theoretical physicist. Together, Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss, covering the Earth and the cosmos, are the subjects of a documentary, The Unbelievers, which debuted at the Hot Docs Film Festival in Toronto last night. And now we welcome them both into our studio, fresh from their film debut. Good to have you both back here at TVO.
It's great to be back.
Well, let's just start by finding out how much you two actually knew about each other before you embarked on this project together. Richard Dawkins, how much did you know about Lawrence Krauss before?
I first met Lawrence at a conference where I'd just given a talk, and he stood up and attacked me vigorously.
Did you like that?
No, but it led to conversations straight afterwards where we ironed things out a bit, and then we wrote a joint piece in the Scientific American, I think, where it was a kind of on-paper debate, a sort of continuation of the debate was sort of about whether we should have a kind of full-on attack on religion, or whether we should, as Lawrence preferred, seduce them.
Mm-hmm. You preferred the all-out attack.
Well,
and I prefer seduction.
Yeah, I sort of feel it works for different people, and that's, the good cop, bad cop joke kind of works a bit. And I think that they both of them work for a different target audience.
Similarly, was that your first encounter with him?
That was my first encounter, yeah, and at length, actually. I think we met briefly once. That was the first encounter, but I remember we actually spent an evening having a really substantive discussion, which I found enlightening. And that's when I thought, this would be an interesting dialogue to actually try and put down.
But did you ask him, as he has characterized it, a rather chippy question?
I thought it was a delightfully charming question. But
no, it was
a question. It was the question, and I must admit, and I think my views have evolved, as I like to think Richard's has, a little bit as we've talked over the years. But I did. At the time, I thought it was a strategic question. I basically said, if you're trying to convince people, do you think sort of going to where they are, rather than pointing out that what they believe is nonsense, is a better way to sort of bring them around? And it was really strategic. And Richard's answer, I think, was the same. I imagine the same we do now, which is at some point, you've got to confront silly beliefs by telling them they're silly. And I respect that. And I think
you don't have to say the person is silly. You can say. I'm rather fond of a quote from Johann Hari, a British journalist, who said, "I respect you too much to respect your ridiculous beliefs."
But you two basically end up in the same place. So the difference is, well, you both don't believe in God.
Yes,
well, we both don't believe in the tooth fairy, and there's a lot of other things. But what I think more important, the same place that we're in, is we both think that that everything should be open to question, and that the universe is a remarkable place. And those are the things that I'm convinced are more important to us than not believing in God. That's not important at all.
Okay, but I guess what I'm getting at here is this. First of all, saw the movie, really enjoyed it. It's a really good documentary, and you two are terrific in it, and you have a great camaraderie and rapport, and that all works very well, which I found unusual, because usually when these kinds of one-on-one documentaries work, it's because they disagree violently about everything, and the clash is what makes it interesting. But as I say, you two both end up in the same place. So why do you think this works? Because you guys agree, essentially, on the main theme here.
I don't think it's necessary to have a clash in order for it to be illuminating television. Just a little anecdote about that. I once had an on-stage debate with Steve Paikin, a very distinguished psychologist and linguist. Canadian, indeed. And that was before a very large audience in London, and it went very well. And then the BBC got to hear of it, and they said, "Would you like to come into the studio and have a briefer version of this discussion?" So we said yes. And then the producer rang me up and said, "Tell me, what's the nature of your disagreement with Dr. Paikin?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure we have much disagreement. I think we pretty much agree." "No disagreement?" Cancelled it immediately.
Shoots off, of course.
Yeah, true.
Well, that's how media think.
But I think the point is, first of all, we agree about many things, and on the movie shows there's some slight disagreements we have about that. We have very different approaches. We're very different types of people, and I think that's really important to point out too. That first of all, I think that people have this stereotype of scientists as all being exactly the same, and I think it's really important that they realize that it takes all types.
Well, may I, at the risk of incurring your wrath here? You are the funny and charming one, and you are not.
I'm serious and charming.
Don't overdo the charming. You're serious and sometimes very angry and upset with people.
No, you're not. No, I'm not. You've believed all the nonsense that's been written
I watched the
about me.
documentary, that's all.
What, last night? I mean, the documentary.
Yeah, the Unbelievers. I've seen it.
You know, but the thing is, Richard is a very pleasant, relaxed, calm fellow. But he presents.
His charm is an acquired taste.
Yeah, well, I think the question it is you're a charming TV host, and it's a property of the way one responds, I think, to the medium, and I think that Richard's seriousness is probably. Richard can jump in, but is a cultural thing. I think I think given where he lives at Oxford and the kind of discussions that he has, culturally it's very different. I think from what North Americans probably are used to, and I think it's fair to say that I have that advantage, at least here on this part of the.
I'm not sure. I mean, it's not for me to say, but I've got a feeling that sometimes, especially where religion is concerned, if you speak clearly, it sounds threatening. Because I think people are used to a sort of woolly, vague, indistinct way of talking. And so if you say something clearly and distinctly and truthfully, there are people who will take that as threatening. Add to that the effect that everybody is so used to the idea that religion gets a free ride, that even a very mild criticism of religion is actually heard as though it was strong and
it's not even. I'm going to jump in. It's not even whether you want to or not. It's not even a mild criticism, as I've encountered, because I've seen now myself called strident, and all the words I've seen applied to Richard, and it's not even a criticism. If you just question it, that's even amazing. If you just ask a question, but could it be that this didn't happen? Again, it's taken as it sounds threatening.
Okay,
yeah.
but you're not questioning whether or not the Blue Jays are going to win the World Series this year. You're questioning the very foundational beliefs of millions of people over thousands of years.
But it's still only a question.
Still only a question.
And you know what? And I think it's very telling that people react defensively. Because, for example, if I questioned you about your taxes, you'd act defensively if you had lied on them, or if you were worried about the truth of them. I think people react so defensively about religion for the same reason that they have to go to church every Sunday. They have to be reminded. It has to be reinforced because it's so damn silly that.
Okay, so let's come at this, as the lawyers say, without prejudice.
Okay.
People go to this movie, they see this movie. What is it that you would like them to take from the movie after having seen it? Richard Dawkins.
I'd like them to be stimulated to think critically, to go away and think about it afterwards, to talk about it afterwards, to have their beliefs shaken a bit, shaken enough that they'll discuss them with each other, discuss it with themselves, and maybe come to a different conclusion.
Are you concerned that only atheists are going to see this, and therefore, if I can use this awful metaphor, you're preaching to the converted?
No, absolutely. I mean, when I was involved in many ways in the preparation of the movie, and I think we designed it, hopefully, to encourage people, in particular to encourage people who may not know who Richard and I are, in fact. I agree with Richard that the point of this is to stimulate discussion. And I like to think that we don't preach in the sense that we're not trying to tell people what to think. We're just trying to encourage people to question, and everything should be subject to question, including religion. It's no different than sex or politics or anything else. It should be open to question. But the second thing is, there's a lot of discussion of the beauty and wonder of, I mean, Richard describes it beautifully in the movie, in my opinion, the beauty and wonder of the universe. And what we really want to do, I think, I hope, is encourage people to get excited about that and think that that's interesting. But part of the reason that, for example, there are a lot of movie stars and celebrities at the beginning in the movie, and one of the reasons that those people are there is to get people interested. Partly, why would Cameron Diaz be in a movie about science, for example? And the really exciting thing is she's fascinated by science, and I think it's important for people to see that it's not just scientists who are fascinated by these ideas and who are willing to say that they're willing to base their view of reality on the evidence of reality.
Sure.
And so you get people that you don't expect, cultural icons, and I'm hoping that will encourage people to say, you don't have to be a scientist to get excited by this stuff.
Let me ask in a bit of a different way whether you two end up in the same place for different reasons. Your specialty is of the earth, if you like. Your specialty is of the cosmos. So did you get to the finish line in a different way than him?
I think we're sort of complementary in that sense. I mean, I was going to say that earlier, that he's a physicist, I'm a biologist, and So we're both interested in origins. We're both interested in why things are the way they are. And historically, I suppose, biology has been the most fertile ground for those who wish to make a supernatural account, because biology, living things are so fantastically complicated and beautiful and elegant, and they carry such an enormous weight of apparent design. They really look as though they're designed. So historically, biology has been the most fertile ground for theological arguments. Now that's all solved now. Darwin and his successors solved that. I think the spotlight in a way has shifted to physics and to cosmology, where we're less confident, I think, about, say, how the universe began. In one way, more confident, because there's a lot of detailed mathematical modeling going on. But there are some profound questions remaining to be answered in that field, and that's where cosmologists like Lawrence come in. So I do think we are complementary in our fields.
I think it's really kind of a very important complementarity too, because it was very non-intuitive. I mean, what Darwin was such an amazing scientist because he took something that looked like special creation, like everything was designed for its environment, and realized how a very simple idea could explain everything. But it was very, and after the fact, you say to yourself, of course, okay? And it's what's wonderful about science. What seems weird, you come to realize is in some sense obvious after the fact. And there are now very non-intuitive things about the universe. For example, how can get all the material in the universe if it wasn't there or if someone didn't create it? That's very non-intuitive. And modern science, as I've tried to write and talk about in the film and other places, is addressing that same question. And it is, in some sense, the last bastion of God. Because there are fundamentalists, of course, who say the Earth is 6,000 years old, who don't believe in evolution. But the rational, quote unquote, theologians have moved away from that debate.
But let me pick up on a word you just used there, which is design. Mm-hmm. And there's a part in the film where you talk about this expression, intelligent design, which many people who believe in God use to explain how we are where we are today. And if I understood you properly, you said you want to reclaim that expression away from those people.
Yeah.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, that was a bit of a sort of joke, really. I mean, because intelligent design is so much associated with creationists. I wanted to reclaim intelligent design for other things like morality. I was wanting to say, let's intelligently design our society, let's intelligently design our ethics, our morality, so that we live in the kind of society that we want to live in, rather than the kind of society that was laid down in a book written 800 BC.
How about the issue of atheism itself? Is it, in your view, a belief system in the way that Christianity, Judaism, et cetera, are?
And that's a big mistake that people have. I was just doing a debate with this Islamic group in London where I tried to emphasize that. It's not a belief system, and that's really important. It's a willingness to ask questions and allow your expectations to conform to the evidence of reality. It's something that we don't use to define the really big difference, and we were just talking about this for the program. We don't define ourselves by what we don't believe in. Some people define themselves as Christian.
He makes that plain in the movie. He's,
Yeah, and so we don't define ourselves as atheists, as Richard says in the movie, or a leprechaunist or whatever. And so I think it's a really healthy thing. Defining yourself by a set of axioms written down by Iron Age peasants who didn't know the Earth orbited the sun is demeaning, I think. And on the other hand, being willing to constantly change your view of yourself as you learn about the universe is called growing up and learning.
Well, let's go through some of the ideas that you present in the film. For example, I think you were asked at one point, was there a first person, an Adam, if you like?
Yes.
So,
yeah. Well, that's a very interesting question. It's one I deal with in my most recent book, The Magic of Reality. There never was a first person because everybody was born to somebody of the same species as themselves. And yet, if you go back a sufficient number of generations, you come to an ancestor that was pretty much like a monkey, or another bit, go back further to about 200 million generations, and you come to an ancestor that was a fish. And yet, every one of those intermediate steps on the way belong to the same species as its parents and its children. Sounds like a paradox, not a paradox. no more a paradox than the fact that a child becomes a teenager becomes an adult, a middle-aged man becomes an old man. You never actually, as I said in that book, you don't go to bed as a middle-aged man and wake up and say, I seem to be old today. And yet, if you wait a sufficient number of years, you have become old. And it's just the same. There never was a first person. There never was a moment when a Homo erectus mother gazed lovingly on the first Homo sapiens child. It didn't happen like that.
Do you agree with that?
Well, of course I agree with it, because, I mean, the thing about science is, a lot of journalists try and suggest that there are two sides to every story, and I like to say in science, one side is just wrong, usually. And Richard's describing the way life evolves, and it's not a matter of my liking it or agreeing with it, it's the evidence of reality. And so I have no choice but to agree with it.
I presume that both of your lives, given your added notoriety now, are quite different from what they might have been, say, 20 years ago, before you both became as connected to this issue and as you guys are on the TV circuit, you've got a movie out now, et cetera, et cetera. Do you ever think about how your life has changed as a result of, you are Richard Dawkins Inc. now, if you like? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I'm less interested in that kind of question than in the scientific questions we've been talking about.
But you're a cultural phenomenon now, which is an interesting thing.
Well, you can say that if you like.
I just did.
Yeah, you
but
are.
It doesn't. Yeah, you are.
I don't want to comment on that.
No,
how about you?
Well, I think I do reflect on it more than Richard, in the sense that I realize, first of all, I have a lot more opportunities to be able to interact and to be able to have an impact. At the same time, I try to be an active research scientist, so I'm quite aware of the time issue and the demands that it takes away. And I like to think that these things I'm doing, like what we are now, are useful. And
I like to think that too.
And I think I'm very privileged, really, actually. I'm very lucky to be able to communicate to people and to be able to say things that people either choose to listen to or hate. Seems to me to be a...
Well, let me follow up on that. Have you ever sat down with, let's, for lack of a better expression, a person of faith, and made the case and actually convinced them of the error of their ways?
I'm not sure sat down with one. I've sat down with many people of faith, archbishops and bishops and people like that. I've never convinced them to change their mind. What I think I may have done is convince other people who may have been listening in on the radio or something like that. I think there's probably a large constituency of people who pretty much don't think about it very much, but have sort of always vaguely thought of themselves as Christian or Jewish. And then when they hear me arguing with, say, the Archbishop of Canterbury, some of them may actually fall off the fence my side.
I don't presume to think that you're going to, convince the Pope that he's wrong. But, it would be the equivalent of winning the World Cup in your world, wouldn't it? If you were able to sit down with somebody who was religious and make the case of logic and then have them change their mind.
I would not aspire really to try to change the mind of the Pope or the Archbishop of Canterbury. But as I was saying before, there could be thousands of people listening in.
They might.
And they might, because they're not so committed in the first place, probably haven't thought about it so much.
Let me jump into your defense. And more explicitly. Since people know that Rich and I are friends and work together, so the God delusion is in some sense sitting down with someone and making the case. And I have people who've written to me and say, after the God delusion, it changed. My life changed. And like sometimes, hopefully, they say the same with my books. But so I think you must get lots of email that say that.
Hugely. As I was coming into the studio, the young woman said that her brother had asked her to tell me that I'd changed his life. I presume he meant from reading The God Delusion. And,
hopefully in a good way.
Yeah, in the right way. And when I do book signings, which I tend to sort of specially go to the Bible Belt and do it there, thousands of people coming through, and almost every one of them says words to that effect.
So
you are
a proselytizer in some respects.
A proselytizer in the interest of getting people to think.
Yeah, provocateur. At least I think of myself as more of a provocateur. And I actually have had the experience. And you know what it is? There's a scene in the movie where we talk about getting people to confront their own misconceptions. The only time I can recall people suddenly saying, aha, is actually when I went to either a fundamentalist college or the one or two times, I was going to say, God forbid, that I went on Fox News in the United States, where I actually managed to get in before being yelled at the statement, you don't have to be an atheist to believe in evolution. Because I don't, there's evidence, obviously you don't have to be, because I know some evolutionary biologists who for whatever reason are religious. But I've had kids come up to me. I remember when I went to a fundamentalist college and I said that, and the kid said, is that true? I've been told in church every week since I've been a little kid that you have to be an atheist to believe in evolution, and that's why evolution is wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm not allowed to accept the evidence of reality because I'm told it's gonna make me go to hell.
I mean, I rather like that. I mean, I rather approve of people being told that, because it's going to be very easy for us to prove that evolution is true. I had a nice experience of an American student who came to Oxford for some time, and he attended he came from a fundamentalist college, and he was a young Earth creationist, and he attended my lectures on evolution, and then at the end of the last lecture, he came down to the front and he kind of thumped the table and he said, gee, this evolution, it really makes sense. The point was he'd never actually been exposed to it before. It wasn't that he'd been exposed to it and rejected it. He just didn't know about it.
Okay, how would you characterize the following person? He's or she is utterly uninterested in the question of whether God exists, but he or she considers himself or herself deeply spiritual. How do you characterize that kind of a person?
Well, I consider myself deeply spiritual in one sense, in the same sense that perhaps Carl Sagan would have done, where I feel deeply moved in a poetic way by the sight of the Milky Way, by contemplation of the size of the universe, by contemplation of the immense span of geological time, by looking down a microscope at a single cell and seeing the intricate structure of a single cell and then reflecting that that cell is multiplied up trillions of times in my own body.
That's not the spirituality I'm thinking of.
Well, it's the spirituality I'm thinking of.
And it's a better spirituality. I've said this again publicly too. I think one of the big misunderstandings and abuses of the discussion of science is that science takes away spirituality, which is really awe and wonder and a sense of something bigger than oneself. But the stuff that bigger than oneself doesn't have to be unreal. It can be real. Mm-hmm. And being part of an amazing cosmos, as I like to say, being completely insignificant is uplifting and can be a spiritual experience. And every time like Richard, every time I look at a Hubble Space Telescope picture, it's spiritually uplifting. The spirituality of science is better than the spirituality of religion because it's real. But I will say that I think that the person you're describing, and there's many of them, is a new breed of people because more and more people are becoming disillusioned by organized religion because of information, of realizing how silly it is, ultimately. But they don't want to lose what they're getting from organized religion. So they transfer to this concept of spirituality, a oneness with the universe, and I think that people like that. We're hardwired, I think, to want that. And there are many things that religion provides that are hardwired for. But the key thing for me is, sure, we recognize that religion provides things, consolation, community. But the key thing is, it doesn't have to be religion that provides those things.
Did I hear you just say we are hardwired to find spiritual meaning in life?
I think certainly. Yeah, I think we are. There's evolutionary advantages, I think.
So then the quest for God or a belief in God is not illogical at all.
No, I mean, you just said to me, that's not the kind of spirituality I'm interested in. What kind of spirituality are you interested in?
Well, I was thinking not so much the spirit, and I appreciate your position. I understand the spirituality you just described, where your part in the cosmos.
I mean, I wrote a whole book about it called Unweaving the Rainbow.
I understand. I understand. But I guess I was thinking about people don't feel a need. People may not feel a need to go into a house of worship, and yet they somehow still have a connection to the morality that comes out of religion.
But morality is another matter.
Okay, but you just jumped in. You said it wasn't irrational. The point is, just because we're hardwired to want to do something doesn't make it rational. We're hardwired to do a lot of things that aren't rational. We were hardwired to be xenophobic in some ways. It's not clear love is rational, and so there's a lot of aspects of being human that don't relate to being rational, and understanding that is important if we want to deal with the real world and try and make the world a better place.
So science can be spiritual.
You're playing with words. I mean,
I'm asking questions. I'm really not playing.
I mean, it depends. What do you mean? If you mean something supernatural, no. If you mean what Lawrence just called awe and wonder, or what Carl Sagan would have called awe and wonder, yes, certainly.
And we should celebrate that.
Yes.
That's the point. I mean, people think science takes away. I mean, we're not the first ones to say this, because as Richard said, Carl Sagan said it, Richard Feynman, who's obviously I'm a huge fan of, is a famous physicist, talked about the fact that understanding how a rainbow works doesn't make it less beautiful. It makes it more beautiful. But somehow people get the sense that science is cold, hard facts, and therefore boring, and also dehumanizing. And I think my goal, and I believe Richard's goal, is to disabuse people of that misconception. Science is wonderful. It's fun, it's exciting, and it's as enjoyable and pleasing to understand as listening to a sonnet or listening to a beautiful piece of music.
Well, let's follow up on that. Describe for me the most recent moment you had in your scientific life where you had, boy, I almost said it, what a religious person would call a come to Jesus moment, where you had a kind of a
poetic moment.
Yeah, poetic, spiritual, call it what you will, moment that really gave you that chill up your spine.
Okay, two experiences, neither of them to do with biology, both to do with physics. I visited the CERN atomic energy establishment in
the Large Hadron Collider.
The Large Hadron Collider, and went down underground and saw this gigantic piece of cooperative human endeavor designed to understand the very fabric of the universe. I was literally moved to tears by that experience. Also moved to tears on a recent visit to a large telescope on the island of Hawaii, and again see this great staring instrument staring up at the sky and reaching out. This is the human species at its finest, reaching out to the distant outposts of the universe and gathering information and bringing it back and analyzing it and understanding it. Again, I was moved to tears by that experience.
Genuinely to tears?
A lump in the throat.
What do you think? How come?
Because I'm spiritual in the sense that I mean, because I have a poetic sensibility which is aroused by science and by the poetry of reality, which is what science is.
And, I think that the point of Richard's experiences, and he just put it beautifully, is that, people think there's a dichotomy, a separation between science and the other aspects of our culture. We celebrate science, in my opinion, too much because of technology. Of course, science is responsible for the technology that's made this program possible and made our lives generally better. We live longer because of science. All of that those are byproducts of science. But the ideas of science, in my mind, are what are so amazing, and they are just as remarkable as the best symphonies and Shakespeare plays. And they do the same thing. They force us to reassess our place in the cosmos. They force us to reassess our views of ourselves, which is really what you get when you see a wonderful bit of drama. You get a new perspective of yourself.
Okay,
go on.
Here's where I'm going to do the okay, but. He's a much more, and I'm not saying this to be complimentary or what's the opposite? Mm-hmm. Critical of either one of you in saying this. You're a more apparently serious guy than you. You've got a lot more Mel Brooks and Woody Allen going through your veins, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. But when I was earlier, my teachers thought I wouldn't be a good student because I like to joke a lot. Yeah.
So are you capable of experiencing that same kind of moment he just described, to the point where you are moved almost to tears by something you see?
I don't know if I'd probably get moved to laughter more than tears.
That's what I'm thinking.
But I think I have just as strong an emotional response. But these things happen to me all the time. In some ways, you couldn't continue to be a scientist as I am without that kind of reinforcement. Because as we say in the movie, it's hard work. And a lot of times you're leading nowhere. You're working for a long time on something and getting nowhere. But the reinforcement you get, when I look at, to take the example I gave you, the Hubble Space Telescope picture of distant galaxies, and think that some of them are 10 billion light years away. That meant the light was emitted 5 billion years before our sun formed. And since most stars last 5 to 10 billion years, that means most of the stars in that picture don't even exist anymore. And if there were civilizations around those stars, they're long gone. And when they get a picture of us, if their civilizations just emerging now, by the time they see the Milky Way galaxy, we'll all be long gone. And those kind of things do amaze me. I wrote a book called Atom, which is the biography of an individual atom. And to me, one of the most poetic things...
ATOM.
ATOM, yeah, as I like to say. In the beginning, there were no Adams or Eves. But the fact that every atom in our bodies was once inside a star that exploded, and maybe different stars, the atoms in your left hand and the ones in your right hand, to me is incredible poetry. It means you're stardust. It means we are intimately connected to the cosmos. They've all experienced the most violent explosion in nature, every single atom in your body, and they couldn't be in your body if the stars didn't explode in the first place, because all the elements that make you up were made in those stars. God, that does move me, and I don't know, maybe it doesn't move me to tears, maybe it moves me to excitement of a different sort.
We've got a couple of minutes left here, and let me finish on this. I appreciate that you told us off the top what you hope people would get out of the documentary if they see it, the need to ask questions, the need to look deeper at all of these issues we've been talking about. Is it your hope or expectation that you can, in your words, I guess, rid this world of religion?
I'm not sure how soon. I mean, I think religion is declining, Christianity is declining throughout Christendom. And I think that's going to continue. If you look at the broad sweep of history, it's clearly the trend is going in the right direction. I'm not so optimistic now that it'll happen in my lifetime, but it will happen, yes.
Last minute to you. What do you
Well,
say?
I would agree in that sense. I think when you're about my age, and when I was young,
How old are you?
well, I don't know whether I want to say on TV. So I'm
will
as
if
old
you
as you.
will.
I'm going to suggest. In any case, we're both old. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
When I was young in the '60s, which will date me, I would have thought by now, I would have thought by now religion would be gone. I mean, in the '60s, it just seemed like it was on the way out. So I was kind of surprised and disappointed by in some ways, the resurgence of fundamentalism in my country. But I do think it's obvious that access to information and knowledge is decreasing. And it's in every country that you can look at, every one of the developed countries, the number of people who define themselves as religious, including the United States, which is a very religious country, is decreasing. So I think the trend is indeed clear. And inevitably, knowledge and wonder of the real universe will supplant. And the access to information is probably the biggest single factor. Not just Richard and I, but the biggest single factor. But it can be helped. And I think very importantly, and this is something I've come to appreciate more with my knowledge of my interaction with Richard, it can be helped by pointing out that it's okay to ask questions about religion like anything else.
Here's another immutable truth in our universe. Interviews end. Time's up.
Okay.
Lawrence Krauss, Richard Dawkins, The Unbelievers, whether you like them or don't, or like religion or don't, it's a really good documentary and people should go see it. Thanks to both of you for coming into TVO tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.